Somewhere over the English Channel, in the dark, in the cloud, a Luftwaffe navigator is listening to a steady tone in his headphones.
The signal is clean. His instruments say he's on course. The beacon he's tuned to tells him exactly where he is relative to Cologne, and everything checks out. Airspeed is good. Heading is good. The tone is strong and unwavering. He has no reason to doubt any of it. That's the problem, because the signal he's trusting isn't coming from Cologne. It's coming from a transmitter in a converted farm building in Cambridgeshire, operated by people who learned how to lie in the enemy's own voice. And by the time that navigator realizes the coastline below him is wrong, it's already too late.
This is the story of how a 28-year-old physicist and a team of engineers in cold huts on the Dorset coast stole the Luftwaffe's invisible highway and turned it into a trap. To understand what Britain pulled off, you need to understand what Germany built first, because it was genuinely brilliant.
In the mid-1930s, the Luftwaffe took a civilian instrument landing system called the Lorenz beam and scaled it up to continental range. They called it Knickebein, crooked leg, and it worked like this. 2 ground stations separated by dozens of kilometers, each transmitted a directional radio beam. One side of the beam sent dots, the other sent dashes, and right down the middle, where the 2 signals overlapped, you heard a continuous, steady tone, an equisignal. If you heard dots, you corrected left. Dashes, you corrected right. Steady tone meant you were riding the beam. A second beam from a different station crossed the first at a precise point in the sky, directly above the target. The navigator listened for the intersection. When the second beam's tone changed, he released his bombs. In clear conditions, the system was accurate to within a few hundred meters at ranges of several hundred kilometers. For night bombing, that was revolutionary. It meant the Luftwaffe could hit specific targets, factories, dockyards, airfields, in total darkness, in cloud, in conditions where a pilot's eyes were completely useless. And here's the part that makes this a radio story. The British Air Ministry didn't believe it was real. The official position in the late 1930s was that skilled navigators using dead reckoning could find their targets. The idea that the Germans had built a radio navigation system capable of guiding bombers to specific buildings in English cities was considered implausible. They were wrong, and the man who proved them wrong was 28 years old, had a staff of 1, and spent most of his time being ignored. Reginald Victor Jones, R.V. Jones, was born in Herne Hill, South London in 1911. First in physics at Wadham College, Oxford, completed his D.Phil by 22. Known among his colleagues for 2 things, an exceptional mind for connecting unrelated fragments of information and a deeply ingrained love of practical jokes. That second one matters more than you'd think, because the entire Battle of the Beams was, in essence, a practical joke played on the Luftwaffe at continental scale. In 1939, Jones became Assistant Director of Scientific Intelligence at the Air Ministry. That title sounds impressive until you learn it meant one man working from a small office with almost no budget. Through the spring of 1940, Jones began piecing together fragments. A mysterious document called the Oslo Report, interrogation notes from captured air crews, logs from crashed aircraft, Enigma decrypts. None of these pieces made sense alone. Together, they pointed to a single conclusion. The Luftwaffe had an invisible radio highway across the English sky, and they were using it every night. On June 21, 1940, Jones was summoned to 10 Downing Street. Late, actually. He nearly missed the meeting. He walked into a room with Churchill and military leadership. He was the youngest person in the room by a considerable margin. He was essentially saying, "Prime Minister, the Luftwaffe has built a precision guidance system that your own experts told you was impossible." Churchill believed him. He ordered an RAF aircraft up that same night to search for the signals. They found them exactly where Jones predicted. Churchill later called Jones the man who broke the bloody beam. But proving the beams existed was only half the problem. The other half was breaking them. Enter Robert Cockburn. Cockburn was born in Portsmouth in 1909. He wasn't an establishment figure. He'd been a science teacher at West Ham Municipal College while completing his PhD, finished it in 1939, the year the war started. Before that, he'd worked at the Royal Aircraft Establishment at Farnborough, building VHF ground-to-air communication systems. He was, by every account, an engineer's engineer, brilliant at making things work under pressure with whatever parts were lying around. In May 1940, Cockburn was sent to the Telecommunications Research Establishment at Worth Mattraverse, near Swanage, on the Dorset coast. Cold huts, windswept cliff tops, equipment bought from civilian suppliers, budgets that would make a peacetime engineer weep. His job was to set up and lead the radio countermeasures section. He had 3 months before the Luftwaffe started bombing in earnest. Now, the first thing Cockburn's team needed was to understand what the German aircrew actually heard. From crashed Heinkels, they extracted the navigation receivers, modified Lorenz sets, EBL-3 variants. When Cockburn's people got them on the bench, they noticed something immediately. These receivers were far more sensitive than any civilian landing aid needed to be. That was the tell. Cockburn's first system was called Aspirin. It broadcast on the same frequency as the Knickebein beam, flooding the equisignal tone with interference. The beam was broken. German bombers that had been hitting specific targets started scattering their bomb loads across the countryside. But Cockburn wasn't satisfied with jamming. Jamming is defensive. It breaks a system without replacing it. What Cockburn conceived next was something altogether more elegant. He called it Meacon, masking beacon, and it's one of the most beautiful pieces of electronic deception in history. German long-range navigation beacons, Reichsnavigation's Funkfeuer, transmitted omnidirectional signals with distinctive call signs. Every Luftwaffe navigator knew them. Cologne, Frankfurt, Hamburg. You tuned in, got a bearing, and knew where you were. Meacon stations, modest transmitters in converted farm buildings and requisitioned coastal structures, intercepted the real German beacon signal, and then rebroadcast it. Same frequency, same call sign, same modulation, from a different location. The navigator tuning to the Cologne beacon received a clean, strong, perfect signal. It sounded exactly right. It had simply passed through a British station and come out the other side pretending to be somewhere it wasn't. A jammed signal tells you something is wrong. A perfect false signal tells you everything is fine, right up until the coastline is in the wrong place. British air crews, briefed on which stations were active and what offsets were being applied each night, could use the exact same rebroadcast signals for their own rough navigation. Especially in the early years, before Britain's own precision navigation systems, G and oboe, were ready, a Meacon signal was a useful reference point. British air crews, briefed on which stations were active and what offsets were being applied each night, could use the exact same rebroadcast signals for their own rough navigation. Especially in the early years, before Britain's own precision navigation systems, GE and oboe, were ready, a Meacon signal was a useful reference point. You knew the offset. You could correct for it. On a dark night over the North Sea with nothing to see in any direction, knowing roughly where you were had real value. And here's a detail that makes radio people smile. The Meacon countermeasure against the most advanced German beam system, Y-Juret, used the BBC transmitter at Alexandra Palace as its rebroadcast platform. Alexandra Palace, the birthplace of British television, repurposed for electronic warfare. The receiver was in a disused BBC station in Swains Lane, Highgate, connected to Alexandra Palace by a high-fidelity cable. The BBC's own infrastructure, designed to broadcast entertainment to the British public, quietly doing double duty as a weapon against the Luftwaffe's most sophisticated navigation system. Nobody watching the BBC knew. The Germans certainly didn't. Cockburn's team built the entire thing from wreckage, civilian radios, borrowed transmitters, and ingenuity. It cost almost nothing. The German signals logs recovered after the war tell the story. On nights when Meacon was active, Luftwaffe navigators reported increasingly erratic position readings. Crews arrived over what their instruments told them was their target and found they were over the English Channel. Others turned for home and found themselves flying inland instead of out to sea. The signals were strong, the signals were clean, the signals were perfectly, beautifully wrong. The psychological effect was devastating, because the worst thing about Meacon wasn't the deception itself. It was that it offered no indication anything had happened. A jammed signal is obviously corrupted. You know you're being interfered with. A Meacon signal sounded exactly like the truth. The doubt came only later, when the ground didn't match the instruments, and by then you'd already committed to a heading that was taking you somewhere you didn't intend to go. Jones was the detective who proved the beams existed. Cockburn was the engineer who broke them and then turned them around. Jones went on to a distinguished career, CBE in 1942, Companion of Honor in 1994, Fellow of the Royal Society. Cockburn was knighted. He went on to develop Window, what we now call chaff, and the Jostle I-4 jammer, the most powerful radio jammer used over Europe during the war.
The entire Battle of the Beams was won by people who understood radio. Not generals, not politicians, not factory owners. Physicists and engineers who could look at a captured receiver on a bench and read it like a book.
A 28-year-old who trusted captured hardware over institutional opinion. A science teacher from Portsmouth who finished his PhD just in time to save his country. A team of engineers in cold huts on a Dorset clifftop, working with soldering irons and hardback notebooks, turning the enemy's own signals into lies.
Now, I left a lot of radio on the cutting room floor with this one. The actual teardown of the EBL-3 receiver, what Coburn's team found when they opened it up. Why the sensitivity was the tell that cracked the whole thing open. And the story of how the BBC's own television transmitter at Alexandra Palace got quietly conscripted into electronic warfare without anyone watching at home having a clue. That stuff was too deep for a 9-minute video, but it's exactly the kind of thing I put in the newsletter. Links in the description if you want the parts of the story I couldn't fit here. As for subscribing, you should do exactly what Coburn did. Listen carefully, figure out what signal's being sent, and decide for yourself whether to trust it. Every other channel is beaming a clean, steady subscribe tone right at you. But maybe someone moved the signpost. Maybe subscribing here takes you somewhere you didn't expect. Somewhere you end up explaining Meacon at dinner parties and your family starts to worry.